What a race. Emotional, heartbreaking, record-breaking, a roller coaster of a race today. Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2021 and welcome to your race review here in Sochi for the 2021 Russian Grand Prix. Now, as always, before we jump into our result and all of the drama from today's race, a spoiler warning is in effect. So if you've not yet seen the race, I would highly recommend you go away, watch the highlights, and then come back, sink your teeth into some race review action. Join us in the comments down below for all the discussion. But as always, if you are new, feel free to subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. But with your spoiler warning finally out of the way, here is your result for today's Grand Prix. Victory number 100. It doesn't tell the full story, but for Lewis Hamilton, the 25 points are in the bag and victory is well and truly secured. From 20th on the grid to 2nd place for Max Verstappen, an incredible comeback and damage limitation. He will be sending a huge thank you to the weatherman today. That rain-stricken final 5 laps or so really coming in handy for Verstappen and Red Bull. And Carlos Sainz, who led the race in the early stages, claims his 3rd podium of the season in P3. Ricciardo finishes as your lead McLaren. We'll get onto that later on, don't you worry. 4th place for Danny Rick, some solid points, but as we all know, for McLaren as a team, to not get a podium, that one stings. Bottas, P5 at the checkered flag, but a really tricky day. Another driver who will be very thankful for those wet conditions. Fernando Alonso, 6th place at the checkered flag, however, was running in those podium places with 4 laps to go. What could have been for the 2-time world champion? Norris, though, is the real what could have been story. It's 7th place with a potential penalty on the way. Heartbreak. We've got to talk about it later on, and a few tears may be shed, but what a drive from this man this weekend, putting all of that experience, all of that incredible, luxurious form we've seen this year from that man in orange, put it all together this weekend, and to come away with 7th place. A fastest lap, but 7th place, but a dominant performance, a dominant drive that should have been victory, is so cruel. It's why we love the sport, it's what makes Formula 1 so special, but it just doesn't make it any easier. 7th place for Norris at the checkered flag. However, on a slightly lighter note, Kimi Räikkönen, 8th place. Where on earth did that come from? Qualifying way down the order, missing the last 2 Grand Prix through COVID. That is how you return to Formula 1. 9th place is Sergio Perez. Should have been a podium. Another driver caught out by those wet conditions late on, and it's a 4th points finish in 5 races for George Russell and Williams. 3rd on the grid yesterday, couldn't hold on to those top spots, but scoring a point in that awful car is another fantastic drive. Starting your bottom half of the grid, the 2 Aston Martin cars, they were in the wars today, 11th and 12th, but Lance Stroll is set to receive a 10-second penalty that should take him down a couple of places. He's also got 2 extra points on his licence after making contact with his teammate. Not a great day for the Aston Martin team. Likewise with AlphaTauri. Gasly, the lead AlphaTauri car, in 13th. His teammate Yuki Tsunoda down in 17th. Race winner this year, Ocon is 14th. Leclerc had a bit of a spin late on in those wet conditions and finishes P15. Giovinazzi 16th, Mazepin 18th, and Latifi and Schumacher both failing to finish and rounding out your field. But as we move over to our race rundown, I've got to come clean. I don't want to do this. This is going to hurt, but I've got to start with it. Though Lewis Hamilton made history today, 100 victories, that is bonkers on its own, and we will get to that, don't you worry. We've got to talk about the man of the moment. The man who starred yesterday in qualifying, securing his first ever Formula 1 pole position in those damp, tricky conditions throughout qualifying, went onto the slicks, and magic happened that day. Pole position for Lando Norris, and the race today, even though he lost out to Carlos Sainz on that opening lap, the fight back, that overtake down in the middle of Sector 2 on that second DRS zone, and the domination of the Grand Prix was faultless. An incredible drive for 48 laps. And then the rain came. Then everything was thrown into disarray. The race spiced up to perfection. But it depends, I suppose, what side you're on, because for Lando Norris, his race crumbled. Already in those closing stages, Hamilton was closing him down. That gap was getting smaller and smaller. But I think Norris, with that awesome straight line speed in the McLaren and the same engine as that Mercedes, I think Norris would have held on. Hamilton earlier in the race was really struggling to get past Daniel Ricciardo, and with Norris more often than not being the quicker of the two McLaren drivers this year, I think Hamilton would have struggled passing Lando. However, when the rain came, initially Norris had a bit of a moment through turn 5, running wide, but managed to come back on and keep Hamilton at bay. And then there was a question mark. Do you come in for the intermediates? Is the rain going to continue lashing it down, or is it going to dry up? And what was even harder for the drivers and teams to judge is that it was only at Sector 2 that it was really getting wet, with the final part of the lap and also the run down towards turn 1 almost bone dry. There's the gamble, there's the conundrum. Do you come in for intermediates and risk losing out on first place, second place, or wherever you are on the field? Or do you stay on the dry? Do you hope that one or two little corners in Sector 2 are going to stay wet, but the rest of the lap you can make up on time on the dry, and you're also gambling it doesn't get wet elsewhere? And that's the route Norris went for. The team wanted plenty of confirmation. There was constant chatter back and forth. The team, of course, had the weather radar and had a better overall picture of the situation. Norris, though, adamant he wanted to stay out, and major respect for taking that risk. Because in Formula 1, and especially in those kind of conditions, it really can swing just one way or the other. Because though the radar may have said, or may not have said, it's going to get worse, this is rain we're talking about. And just because the radar says it's going to get worse, or it may get worse, there's no guarantees there. And this is where races are won and lost. This is where a gamble, a risk, can pay off. And it's a very different kind of risk when you're leading the race. When you've led the race for the entirety of the Grand Prix, the luxury of being in second place, like Lewis Hamilton was, is first of all, you can gauge what the other guy in front of you does. So either you can copy him, or in Hamilton's case, if you want to go for the victory, do the opposite. And they did exactly that, stopping a lap or two earlier than Lando Norris. And in that time, unfortunately for Norris, it just got worse. And as the rain continued to throw it down on that lap, that seemed to be an entirety for Norris to get back to the pit, the damage had already been done. And just as Hamilton was closing in down towards turn 5, the weather was too much. Norris went flying on, almost into the wall, managed to just spin the rear tyres and stay facing forward, but the race was done. The lead was gone, and actually, as he tried his very best to crawl back to the pit, position after position was gone. Falling down to 8th place, overtook Kimi Räikkönen actually on the last lap. There's now a penalty looming, as when he did come into the pit lane, it just got worse, went over the white line, came back in to make his stop. There's not been an announcement on a penalty yet. By the letter of the law, he should get one. And we saw Yuki Tsunoda do this twice in Austria earlier on in the year, so I think it'll be a similar penalty. I think he got 10 seconds for both occasions on that day. However, this case is slightly different in the fact it was very wet conditions, and Norris was on the dry tyres, did outbrake himself, and that's where the FIA will come from. McLaren will say, look, he was on dries, and it was chucking it down at that point. How could he slow down on such a tight corner? And also, do they expect him to continue in those horrendous conditions? Surely that would have been even more dangerous for him to continue on. So that's where McLaren will come from. That's me playing devil's advocate. But from a purely functional viewpoint, although it just makes this horrible situation even worse, I think he will get given a penalty. And what could have, would have, should have been Norris's first Formula 1 victory, it all comes apart with 4 laps to go. A similar heartbreak to George Russell in Sakhir last year with Mercedes, but for both of them, their time will come. Of course, Russell is moving to Mercedes next year, but for Norris, from what we've seen this season, from what we've seen today, I think we're all convinced this man can win races, multiple races, fight for championships, but it's not out of the question he can win this season, because that performance today was so dominant, was so impressive. Hindsight, of course, is a wonderful thing, and yes, we now know he should have put on those intermediate tyres, but that's the point of a gamble, that's the point of a risk. And though you've got Hamilton, Verstappen, those elite top drivers that got that call right, you've also got race winners and world champions, Perez, Alonso, Vettel for example, that went the way of Norris and also got it wrong. It's put a horrible taste in everyone's mouth about this race, but actually if we put that Norris story to one side, it's hard to do that, but if we do it for a moment, it was a cracker today. That was the best race in Sochi. And Ricciardo on the other side of the garage still comes away with 4th place, outscoring Ferrari as a team this weekend. But it's a horrible feeling nonetheless. But on a slightly lighter note, history was made today. Lewis Hamilton not only claimed his 100th victory, not only does he retake the lead in the drivers' standings, he had to work for it today. This was one of his harder of his 100 victories, dropping down to 8th place off the start, got boxed in by Sainz and Norris, dropped behind Stroll, Ricciardo and his old rival, Fernando Alonso. But the overtake of the race came a couple of laps later with Hamilton flying around the outside of turn 3. Hamilton on the better of the tyres out of the two of them at the time, but it was great to see those two once again going wheel to wheel, and Hamilton's strategy went the opposite to a lot of those guys at the front, went that little bit longer. The overcut on Stroll, Sainz and Russell played into his hands beautifully, and though Ricciardo was holding him up at one stage, Ricciardo had a slow stop. That helped Hamilton. The fresh tyres doing that overcut let him overtake Sainz, keep in front of Perez and chase down Norris for that victory. It could have been a lot worse today. Things certainly played into his hands, but keeping his nose clean, having that wealth of experience to know when to swap onto those inters, secured him that victory today. 100 is just a crazy amount to think of, and I like to think this race will be remembered for the guy going for race victory 1 and the guy going for race victory 100. It's cruel in a sense that Hamilton won out, but Norris will have his time. Lewis in control in those final moments. 53 seconds in front of Max Verstappen at the checkered flag. So on paper, it's one of his most dominant performances. But in reality, a very hard day of work, but a great drive from Lewis Hamilton. And from Valtteri Bottas, taking that engine penalty, didn't hold up Max Verstappen, almost let him through in those opening stages. Lap 6, he lost out to Max. To make things worse, he didn't make his way through the field, stuck in a fight with his new employers Alfa Romeo, and was left in this weird no man's land of 12th, 13th place. The rain really came in handy. He was one of the first guys to come onto the intermediates with Max Verstappen, incidentally, and he's come away with 5th place. A very lucky boy, because up until those last 3 laps, a terrible day for Valtteri Bottas. But as I just mentioned, with Verstappen also coming in pretty early on, a race that already was turning into a really good recovery drive from 20th on the grid got even better. Damage limitation was the aim of the game today, and at one point, I thought Red Bull may do the switcheroo. Crofty mentioned it in commentary as well. They didn't. Alonso got past Verstappen and it seemed Max would finish the race in 7th place. Not a bad drive, but then when they made that call, it was worth a gamble for them being in 7th place, knowing a championship is on the line, and for Red Bull, the risk paid off. But they did it both ways. They brought Max in early to finish off that incredible race, but they also left Perez out that little bit later to cover off Hamilton if those wet tyres didn't work out. Of course, they did, and that's why Perez dropped from what would be a great third place finish, or fourth, he was fighting with Alonso, all the way down to ninth place. But from Max's point of view, a great day. The championship is still well and truly on. Ferrari, third place for Carlos Sainz, took the lead into turn 2, and a strong drive through the field with that weird strategy call to come in really early to try and do the undercut on Norris, who had just taken the lead, but there was just too much traffic, way too much traffic to pull off an undercut. I also don't think Ferrari had the pace to beat McLaren, Mercedes or Red Bull today anyway, and though he would have been about 4th or 5th place come the checkered flag without the rain, it played into his hands pretty nicely too. 3rd place, a well-deserved drive, a well-deserved podium. Leclerc was in the wars. It's something we expect from Charles, who made a great start from 19th all the way up to 12th, went super long on his hard tyres, was one of the last drivers to stop in that first wave of pit stops, then had a great fight with Sebastian Vettel, which the TV directors, side note, they were pretty terrible today. We weren't watching, but we could see it in the distance on that little box on the left-hand side of the tower. Then Max went for a move. A little bit of contact between Leclerc and Verstappen, both of them getting away with it. And then eventually, when that rain came down, Leclerc at one stage flew up the order and looked like he may be able to nick a podium. But then he didn't come in. Just like so many of those guys went too long, didn't take that gamble, went flying off exactly where Norris did at turn 5 and ends up all the way down in P15. Fernando Alonso in 6th place. Before the race, in my predictions, I touted him for a podium, and it seemed at one point he was going to get it. He was so close, was fighting with Perez for 3rd place. We didn't see a lot of it on TV, which is frustrating because those guys were swapping places back and forth for about 3 or 4 laps until the rain came. When it did, took too long to go onto the Inters and lost out. 6th place though, a really good points haul and a really strong weekend from Fernando, whereas Esteban Ocon, a really quiet day, 14th place at the checkered flag. 8th for Raikkonen, 4 points, could be more if Norris gets a penalty. That's a great day. He's not raced in the last 2 Grand Prix after testing positive for COVID-19, but what a comeback. What a drive, that experience of knowing when to make that call, but also playing it safe on the risk side of things, has paid off beautifully. A great drive from Raikkonen, and Giovinazzi 16th, a poor weekend really. A spin in qualifying, behind Raikkonen in qualifying, an almost absent race, not ideal for a man driving for his future. Russell in 10th, another point for Williams, his 4th points finish in 5 races. Started 3rd, and the team, probably in the back of their minds, would have been secretly hoping for something really special, but followed Sainz, followed Stroll on that undercut. It really didn't work out, went flying backwards through the order, was about 10th place anyway when the rain came. So for Russell, didn't make any difference either way. However, with Raikkonen being a little bit more aggressive on that call to Inters, Williams have lost out to Alfa Romeo, with Latifi not finishing the race and also, like Giovinazzi, having a really quiet one at the back of the field. No points for Aston Martin, I feel doesn't really tell you the picture of their race, which was, in essence, a story of 2 halves, with Stroll having a flawless start to the Grand Prix. Was so good, he was 4th place at the end of lap 1, held it for quite a few laps until those first round of pit stops, but as I mentioned, went for that undercut and it didn't work. Ending up being caught in that no man's land part of the midfield, got caught by his teammate late in the race as the rain started to trickle down. Contact between the two of them? Come on guys, Lance just half asleep as Seb tried to go around the outside of turn 8, pushing his teammate into the wall, then running into the back of him the very next corner. Not good. And it's a shame because the start of the race was fantastic from Lance Stroll, and in those wet mixed conditions he normally comes alive. But that silly mistake, that lapse in concentration has let him down. It's let his teammate down as well, because Seb also looked like he may be able to steal some points. Went a little bit too long on that call for the Inters. No points for Aston on a circuit they were hoping they could score double. Not great for the boys in green. Gasly in 13th, Tsunoda in 17th. AlphaTauri, plain and simple, didn't have the pace this weekend. Just didn't have the pace this weekend. It's only the second time this year they've not scored points. It's the first time both cars have finished and they've not scored points, but they didn't have the pace. Contact with Stroll and Gasly. Another point for Stroll having a difficult end to the race. Stroll just being a little too aggressive down the inside at turn 7. Gasly wasn't in the points anyway, and it was just a scruffy day from AlphaTauri. And our final team, as pretty much is a customary in 2021, Haas, it's just another one of those days. 18th for Mazepin, who in fairness made a great start at his home Grand Prix, went forward a couple of positions up to 13th place, but inevitably that car is rubbish, so just fell backwards through the field, and Schumacher retiring about halfway through the Grand Prix. No news exactly what that is just yet. I believe it's some sort of power unit issue. Just Haas things. It's what their story was today. But again, just to reiterate, to give these guys and their fan base a little bit of hope, this is what they expect this year. Full focus on their 22 car. It's been the same story all year long. But yeah, a terrible day again for the Haas team. And that, ladies and gents, rounds out your grid. So before we go, let's take a look at your drivers and constructor standings, as well as race rating and driver of the day. But first up, in your driver standings, Lewis Hamilton takes the lead. 2 points, it's so close, 2 points in front of Max Verstappen. Valtteri Bottas extends his lead over Lando Norris. However, Norris also extends his lead over Sergio Perez. Sainz leapfrogs his teammate into P6, Leclerc P7. Ricciardo, good points today in 4th, closes in on Charles Leclerc. Gasly is 9th, and Fernando Alonso rounds out your top 10. And in the bottom half, there's no changes. Ocon leads Vettel and Stroll. Tsunoda is 14th, just 2 points in front of George Russell. Latifi 16th, Raikkonen 1 point behind Latifi now on 6 points. Giovinazzi has 1, and Schumacher, Kubica and Nikita Mazepin all yet to score. And in the Constructors, there is also no changes. Mercedes extend their advantage over Red Bull Racing. McLaren extend theirs over Ferrari. Alpine scored well today. However, AlphaTauri and Aston Martin didn't score at all. It's 1 point for Williams. However, 4 for Alfa Romeo today. Sees them close in, but it's still a sizable gap between the two backmarker teams. And Haas still the only team yet to score. A great race today in Sochi, a strategic race, a race threatened by rain, and a race with true potential to see a brand new winner. History was made today. It's a race perfect for me. This is the kind of race I love. A 9 out of 10 for my race rating and my driver of the day. In qualifying, of course, I'm giving it to Lando Norris. In the race, I'm going to give it to Verstappen with that incredible comeback drive. However, I cannot ignore that stunning drive from Lando Norris. And so my racing reviews driver of the weekend, of course, is Lando Norris. That is it from me here in Sochi. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being really patient. I put up a message over on the community page. Teacher training, I am loving it. It's full time now, so getting these reviews out with practice, quali, a preview is impossible for the time being. But race reviews 100% will be staying, with stuff sprinkled in between. Don't you worry. But thank you all for being patient. Hopefully, I think you would have, hopefully you enjoyed the race this weekend, even if it was a little bit upsetting for McLaren and Lando Norris fans. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you are new, feel free to subscribe. Guys, as always, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.